First Minister, does leave mean leave for all of the UK?
No, I don't think it necessarily does, and that's really my starting point here to question whether that has to be the case. Scotland, after all, voted overwhelmingly to remain within the European Union, and I think the will of the Scottish people should be respected. Now, having said all that, I don't underestimate the challenges that lie ahead for us in trying to find a different path to the rest of the UK. But I think I've got a duty to try to honour what the people of Scotland voted for and do everything I can and explore every option to protect Scotland's place in the EU.
What do you say then to the Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy, who says if the UK leaves, Scotland leaves?
Well, I don't think it's particularly surprising to hear the acting Spanish Prime Minister, of course, say that. That's the view that Spain has expressed previously about Scotland's position. But the second thing I would say is that we are now in uncharted territory, and the situation now compared to Scotland's situation in 2014 is different. It's a very unique situation.
But you would need the agreement of Spain and indeed all other EU countries for any arrangement.
Look, of course, but we're at a very early stage of a process, and we are in uncharted territory. Indeed, it's not even clear what Spain's political leadership will be in the period ahead. They've just had another inconclusive general election. So, these are all issues that, of course, we will require to work our way through. But we are not yet a week on from the referendum. In this early stage, my priority is to make sure there is an understanding across Europe that Scotland voted differently to the rest of the UK, and that there is an aspiration in Scotland to protect our relationship with the European Union.
Spain says Scotland doesn't have the competence to negotiate with the European Union. Isn't that an effective veto of your ambitions to stay inside?
We're at an early stage in the process, and what I'm here today doing is just putting Scotland's case and making Scotland's voice heard. Yes, much of the discussion that we will have to try to chart a different course for Scotland will be discussion in the context of the UK negotiations, and I want to make sure Scotland's interests are properly protected there. I'm not pretending at this stage that I have all of the answers to the questions that will arise out of this situation that I didn't create and I didn't ask to be in, but I've got an absolute duty, given how people in Scotland voted last week, to try to find a way of protecting Scotland's position in the EU, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to seek to do.
The former UK Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, is suggesting that the next best thing would be for the UK to negotiate membership of the European Economic Area, like Norway and Iceland. Do you agree with him?
No, I think the best thing is for us to stay in the European Union. I mean, I think the thing about the Norway solution is that it's access to the single market. It accepts free movement of people, and it means that the UK would, or Scotland, or whoever would have to continue to pay a contribution. In other words, what you get with the Norway solution is, all of the obligations of EU membership, benefits of the single market, but you don't have a seat around the table trying to influence the rules of the single market. I don't think that is a good situation.
Best thing for either the UK or Scotland if you can't be inside?
I'm focusing on the best thing for Scotland just now, and not just the best thing, but the best thing that people in Scotland actually voted for. And this is the thing we've got to remember here. Yes, across the UK, people voted to come out of the EU, and people are now asking what's the best alternative. But that's not the situation in Scotland. In Scotland, we voted to stay in the EU, and I've got an obligation to try to give effect to what people in Scotland voted for, not immediately go to second, third or fourth best options.
Some people talk about the possibility of the treaties continuing to apply to parts of the UK like Scotland whilst England and Wales withdraw. Is that a serious option or not?
Look, a few days on from the referendum, before the Article 50 process has even been triggered, we shouldn't be ruling any of these options out. We should be prepared to look at all options and assess the pros and cons of them, and that's the approach that I've very definitely said that I want to take. Now, as we proceed further down this road, no doubt some options that people say now should be looked at will prove not to be possible or not credible or perhaps not desirable, and our options might narrow. But at the moment, I've got an open mind, and I'm keen to look at every potential option, and one of the reasons I'm here today is to try and encourage people here to keep their minds open as well.
What do you think the chances of a second independence referendum are now, not least in light of the Spanish government's comments?
Well, I'll say to you today what I said, I think, to you on Friday when you asked me that same question. I think a second independence referendum is highly likely over the next period, given what happened with the EU referendum last week. But I've also said I'm not coming at this from a starting point of independence. Everybody knows I support independence. My starting point here is how do we protect Scotland's interests and give effect to what Scotland voted for.
If we were continuing in the European Union as an independent country, we may well have to agree to adopt the euro.
Well, it's not my position to go into the euro. And what I'm arguing here is not that Scotland leaves and applies to go back into the European Union. I want us to examine all options for retaining our current membership of the European Union.
But hasn't one of the 27 countries said today that that can't happen, and only one needs to veto for it to be blocked?
As I said to you here, I'm not here today asking for commitments from other European countries or for the European institutions. I'm here today at the start of a process which is about examining all options for Scotland. And, you know, I think it is, I've said this before and I will say it again because it's worth repeating. We are less than a week after a referendum that I didn't ask for. I didn't want to see this outcome. This is not a situation I wanted Scotland to be in. It's not a perfect situation. Far from it. My job now is to try to navigate a path through this that gets the best possible outcome for Scotland. There are going to be some hurdles along the way. There are difficulties and challenges. There's not an easy path ahead. I said as much to Parliament yesterday. But my job is to try to find the best path that leads to the best outcome for Scotland, and that's what I'm focused on doing.
Have you reached any agreement with President Schulz? Do you hope to get some sort of indication from President Juncker?
I've not been here today asking for commitments. I've been here today putting Scotland's case, making Scotland's voice heard and making sure there is an understanding and an awareness across the European Union institutions of Scotland's position here. I've had a very warm welcome, I've had a very sympathetic response, and I've been very pleased with the discussions I've had.
What about the 1 million people in Scotland who did vote to leave? Do you speak for them on this issue? UKIP say you don't. The Scottish Whitefish Producers Association today urged you not to pursue this course.
Well, I certainly want to speak to the people who voted to leave, because I recognise that there are people who voted to leave who did so out of a range of different concerns. Some will be about the European Union, some will have been, you know, other concerns that they were expressing there, but they, you know, expressed a view. It's a legitimate view, and it's one that I've got to listen to. And I said in my statement to Parliament yesterday, I think there's an obligation on all of us to understand and to respond to those concerns. But, you know, clearly, equally in a democracy, you know, overwhelmingly people in Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, and that's the view that I've got to reflect.
Just finally, there's a political crisis at Westminster at the moment. Do you think the leader of the opposition should go?
I think it's hard to see how the leader of the opposition can stay in position while, you know, so many of his MPs don't support him. But I do think, you know, there is a serious question for Labour, given that Jeremy Corbyn has so much backing from the grassroots, of how they can possibly be in a situation where their parliamentary party and the activist base of their party are so seriously at odds. And I'm sure there is a lot of people in the Labour Party who voted for Jeremy Corbyn who feel extremely uneasy and perhaps angry to see him overthrown and toppled, or potentially overthrown and toppled by MPs against their wishes. So yes, it's difficult to see how a leader can stay on in these circumstances, but I think it all adds up to a lot of unhappiness and, to me, seemingly irreconcilable differences within the Labour Party.
First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, thank you.
Thank you.